Hi everybody. Okay, today's video is going to be a little bit different. My other videos have been me presenting my techniques and tips, but today we're actually going to do a bit of an experiment. So stay tuned to find out how my experimentation with vibratory tumbler polishing for dice paid off in the end. Alright, everyone who's ever attempted to make handmade resin dice knows this, but polishing is the worst part of the process. It's time consuming, it's tiring, and for many makers it's painful. Normally my process takes about 6 hours per set of dice to do. It takes me through 1,000 to 1,200 grit, wet sanding, and then 4 different Zona papers. I have not done a video on my sanding process because there are lots of good videos out there on it. I'll find one and link it up top for you. To top that off, I'm a mom, a full-time college professor, and a PhD student, and frankly, I just don't have that kind of hands-on time. Vibratory tumblers have become a hot topic in our world of dice making, but not too many people are experimenting yet. Ribinator recently put out a video, which I'll link above, where he got some very promising results. But here's the thing, I wanted a method like his, but with less mess and less waste and less time. So the question is it possible? So I started off with some research and found out that those who work with 3D filament printing as professionals often do vibratory tumbling to give their products a smoother finish. And so here you see me trying to work out what kind of media was best. The one that Ribinator and a couple other dice makers have used at this point is hardwood media, and it usually comes in square or rectangular or cuboidal kind of shapes. And what I was thinking as I looked at this is that with those shapes, you're always going to have an edge that can rub along your nice sharp edged dice, and it's going to create some dulling. And this indeed was something that Ribinator found in his video. The other major shape out there of tumbler media is triangular, and a lot of people use it for what they call deburring, which involves taking edges off of things and creating the initial smooth finish. Well, that's obviously not what we want to do. But as I dug a little further, I found out that those filament printer professionals were using ceramic beads for their polishing, and that sounded promising, especially when, as I demonstrate here, you consider that a round spherical surface is going to roll right off of your sharp edges and not cause them as much damage. So with that, I was pretty content, and I went ahead and I got this polishing media off of Amazon. You see it's a non-abrasive porcelain ceramic sphere. I happened to get the 3mm, and I got 2.5 pounds. It says that you can wash and reuse it, which I'm all about reuse because we already have plenty of waste in the plastic department in our art. I also picked up a bunch of very cheap funnels, which is a tip I picked up from the Ribinator video. And then I went ahead and grabbed 2 sets of what I would call waste dice. They were dice that for whatever reason I wasn't happy with the final result such that I could sell them. So I grabbed the funnel that I thought best fit in the bottom of my tumbler here. This is a cheap tumbler from Amazon. I think it cost about $48 total. I went ahead and put in my ceramic media, and from what I had read, the FDM printing professionals use this dry with no sort of polish or liquid in it. I will say 2.5 pounds of media ended up not being quite enough. It still does something, as you'll see, but I ended up ultimately going and buying another 2.5 pounds. So here we have my 2 sets. This first one I made without a pressure pot. The issue that it has is that I tried to put some wire in it and I did not get it far enough back from the faces, so it does stick through in places, and therefore I will never sell this set. It obviously does have some issues, but its finish overall was not too bad. So I took that set and I went ahead and I sanded each one down to the gray Zona, which is 15 micron. And you can see there were some other issues. This was something I cast in an older mold, and there was some concavity to the faces, and overall just a lot of issues with this set. But I'm just showing you what the finish looks like before I drop it in. The other set I selected was one, I was trying to get like a raindrop effect, so it's mostly clear. And the reason I chose this one to experiment with is because it's so clear, we'll be able to see literally everything that the media does to the resin. So it'll give us a really good inside and out look. Now you can see my dice come out of my molds with a pretty darn good finish, and this is just because I take the time to polish my masters really, really well before I make my molds. So that's just one thing, you know, I don't usually have to sand too much, but any time staved is awesome for me. So you can see I didn't quite have enough media to really cover them. Again, I think I would recommend just going straight for 5 pounds of media when you're working with this particular tumbler. And hopefully what the funnel will do once we turn it on is it's going to create a nice swirling motion of the media to pull the dice under. I do apologize for the somewhat awkward camera. I had to do this out in the garage because it became very apparent when I turned on the tumbler to make sure it was operating that this was not going to be a quiet process. And I will play a small clip of what that sounds like, but this will not be something that someone who lives in an apartment or with close neighbors is going to want to do unless they're very understanding. So as I mentioned, very, very loud, very, very noisy, even outside of the garage. So do be cognizant if you have neighbors that this is not going to be friendly to them. But they're off, they're cycling through, they were syncing, and all I could do was hope and pray because I had not seen any videos on this particular technique with this particular media, and I frankly had no idea what it was going to do to the dice. But that's the nature of experimentation. So came back about an hour later just to see how things were going, make sure that I wasn't, you know, completely dissolving my dice or something crazy like that. But I went ahead and I opened up my tumbler, and we'll just take a look at how those dice did after an hour. All right, so the first thing I noticed when I grabbed them is that they almost felt like satin. They'd gone from like a glassy feel to a satiny feel. Now remember, these green ones were sanded to a matte finish with Zona paper before I put them in, and they pretty much look exactly the same. But my clear ones, and I'm trying to show you, they almost have like a really even satiny finish after an hour. So you can definitely tell that the media are doing some sort of sanding and some sort of, you know, effect on the surface. What I really liked was that my corners were still all nice and sharp, and so were my edges. So at this point, I felt pretty confident that we were getting somewhere at least, and it was probably okay to stick them back in and get the thing started up again. So I went ahead and sealed it up, and now we're gonna come back 4 hours later, approximately. I do have a toddler at home, so, you know, occasionally they ran a little more, a little less. I don't really think vibratory tumbling is a terribly exact science, though, after this experiment. So at the 4 hour mark, we went ahead and pulled them out. Again, this is a fairly cheap tumbler. You can get a really nice one for about $200, but I wasn't shelling out that kind of money for an experiment. All right, so now at the 4 hour mark, you can see that the finish has gotten even smoother, but still very satiny. Still not that mirror finish that we really strive for the most part in the dice making community. That being said, it felt really nice. It was really, really even. And again, my corners and edges were pretty well intact. So at this point, I thought to myself, I don't know if this is gonna do it, but we've definitely done something. At this point, I would say this is equivalent to sanding up to probably the pink Zona paper, which for those of you less familiar with Zona, that's 3 micron polish. So I've gone from no polish up to 3 micron in a matter of 4 hours with no hands-on time. So for me, that's already a bit of a triumph. And you can see it's even working on the ones that I had sanded up to that 15 micron grit. Again, remember that these green dice have many issues, and that's part of why I'm using them as a sacrificial set for this experiment. So at this point, as I was looking at them, I decided to return most of them to the tumbler for a longer bit, but I also wanted to try something. I have heard a lot of people talk about polishing their dice with plastic polish and a cotton buffer on a Dremel tool. And I just happen to have a Dremel tool at home. And so I thought, well, you know, it's not entirely hands-off, but let's just see what we end up for time total if I choose to do that. So I put most of the dice back in the tumbler for another 4 hours, so they'll end up with a total of 8 hours. And I went and I took 2, and I sat out on my porch and decided to see what kind of a shine I could get out of my 4-hour tumbled dice with just some plastic polish and this little bitty Dremel that I have. So this is all fairly straightforward. I was using Flitz because it's what I have. I just took it and put it on one of the soft cotton buffing pads that you can get for your Dremel. Rubbed it in pretty good because I didn't want it to just all fly off as I started spinning the Dremel. Again, this is the first time I had done this, so my technique is probably not optimal, and I'm sure others will feel free to comment below with what you do if you have other suggestions, but this is just what I did. And you can see it's really not a bad polish on that D4. It's just not quite where I would want it to be. So we'll go ahead and turn on the Dremel, and I'm going to speed things up here just a little bit. This is going at about 2 times speed now. Again, this was my first time working with the Dremel and the Flitz, so I was still kind of figuring out what I was doing. But I'm going to go ahead and speed through this. And we can see now we're starting to get a little bit of a very promising shine right there that made me very, very happy. So at that point, I decided, you know what, let's just do this whole die. Let's just see where we end up. Everything else is in the garage still tumbling, and so we don't really need to worry about that. Let's just see what we get and how long it takes. So I ended up spending probably 5 minutes on this one D4. And then I also have a D10 that I had pulled that you actually saw at the very beginning of this video. I find that, you know, it's much easier on my wrists and my fingers, obviously using a Dremel as opposed to repetitive motion on a sanding board. And I do know there's a lot of people in the community who have various joint issues that makes it almost impossible for them to do the kind of sanding required to get a mirror polish. So maybe this will be helpful for those makers out there. All right, at this point, I realized I had nothing to wipe off the excess Flitz with, and so of course that's what jeans are for. And I'm gonna go ahead and shift the camera down and show you. So this shine was achieved with 4 hours in the tumbler and about 5 minutes of Flitz polish. And it's basically back to the kind of mirror shine that I get from my master, so I was really happy. So the other question I had to ask, because one of the things I do is I do the last Zona paper, which is this one. This is the 1 micron white Zona. Right after I ink my numbers, it's a way I get the excess ink off. And so I wanted to see what happened if I just did the 8 hours of tumbling and the white Zona paper. Did I need to do any additional polishing? And frankly, I think the answer is no. I'm speeding through this right now. This is at double speed because no one wants to sit and watch me sand at real time. But I went ahead and just polished, you know, this is again the 8 hours in the tumbler plus probably 10 to 15 minutes on the white Zona just for the D6. And it's really quite a good result. I mean, never mind the water on there. You know, I didn't have anything set up. So I ended up doing a total of 5 different experiments. So I have my original finish, 4 hours in the tumbler plus Flitz in the Dremel, 8 hours in the tumbler alone, and then 8 hours with the Dremel and 8 hours with the white Zona. So here's the original finish on both sets of dice, just so you remember where we came from. And again, I don't often have to do that much sanding on mine, and I still end up spending 6 hours plus. So this was 4 hours with the Dremel. We got a really nice polish, and I was really quite happy with it. I think that might end up being the formula I go with from here on out, to be completely honest. just because I'm always looking for the least amount of time and effort that you can to get the product out. Those that went in just for 8 hours in the tumbler, this is no additional polish afterwards, have a pretty darn respectable shine to them. And I know a lot of makers, especially if these weren't completely clear dice, this would probably be sufficient, in all honesty. The points and edges stayed nice and sharp. The polish is very uniform all over, has a really nice shine, especially if you look at that face of the D12. Like I said, I think you can see the little bit of flaw that remains in the extra clear dice, but on the green dice it looks really good. Then we have the 8 hours plus the Dremel shine, and man, those babies sure did shine. I loved them so much. It was so easy. It took probably less than 5 minutes a die with the Dremel to get that polish. I will say, I did not get the results I was hoping from the ones that I sanded down to 15 micron first. I think they probably needed longer. And then this is the white Zona at the end. And so you can see I'm really quite happy with all of the finishes, and all of these I was able to do 2 sets the entire 8 hours. So that was 2 sets in 8 hours, but no hands-on time. So that was time I could spend pouring something else, being with my family, working on homework, you name it, I could do it. I ended up at the end going ahead and dumping in 4 whole sets of my really nice finished dice just on a leap of faith, and they came out really well too. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those up here at the end as just a little bit of dice pouring for those of you who love it. And I hope you guys learned from this experiment. I hope it helped someone out. If you did enjoy this experiment, please feel free to share this video, like, subscribe, comment below on other things you'd like to see me do as an experiment. We're getting really close to the 1,000 follower mark here on YouTube, which means we may have to do something big. And I'd love suggestions for what you all think that should be. In the meantime, keep enjoying your dice craft, don't stop experimenting, and don't let them take the fun out.